Hello and welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize. I'm your host, and I got something special for everyone today, and that is we've got a gentleman here that is no stranger to our show, and he has decided to jump on with us and we're now a team of three, so I'm going to have three co-hosts or two co-hosts, uh, and we're just going to be a team of three. His name is Travis. What's up, Travis?
Hey, David, doing great. Super stoked to be here and to be like in the moderator chair and instead of being in the hot seat this time. So I kind of like that. Yeah, just super excited to be part of the team, man.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you. You've helped out a lot too, man. Just like Caleb, you've scheduled shows for us and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
Caleb's not able to be here all the time,
Right.
so I just think it's great to have somebody that will give me a chance to actually take a vacation. So,
Mhm. Well,
but yeah,
I'm honored to be part of the team, David.
yes, and we're honored to have you. We do have Aaron Fitzwater back on. He came on last month or the month before. Yeah, it was the month before. And or no, it was last month. May, wasn't it? Yeah,
I think so,
early
yeah.
May. And you gave an argument with your theodicy, for the problem of evil. And I thought that was really cool. And our initial idea was to have an atheist response, and our atheist wasn't allowed or able to make it. So doubling back, Rich got in the hold of me, and things went from there. And now we got somebody to give you some pushback.
Hmm.
So nobody doesn't, this is the first time Rich has actually been on the show, and we want to give him a big warm welcome,
Absolutely.
everybody. So yeah, hi Rich.
How you doing, everyone? Uh,
So I
Great,
met
great to have
Rich
you.
through Skeptics and Seekers. He
Hmm.
was very thoughtful, and I think it was the moral argument you and Dale were debating.
that's
And I
right.
was like, man, these guys are pretty good, pretty cordial.
Hmm.
And Rich really struck me as the cordial type. So this is like going to be the perfect pushback for you, Aaron. So he's very thoughtful. So yeah. With that, I'm gonna leave it up to you guys. Aaron, why don't you explain your theodicy real quick, your argument for the problem of evil, and we'll let Val take it from there, and you guys can jump back and forth. We will moderate, we will stay out of it, and let you guys kind of handle the show there,
Okay.
unless clarification, of course.
All right. Well, thank you, Val, for joining us. I've no idea what I'm in for, so we'll see.
I should just maybe just mention for anybody listening, I've been called both Rich and Val so far. Val is my online Scream moniker taken from the Star Trek, the Apple episode, Val, the false god. So I've just used that online as the avatar moniker. That's why I'm being referred to as Val. So you can refer to me as Rich or Val, doesn't matter.
Okay, so you'll constantly see me looking up. I am going to refer to the paper I wrote. It's like 30 something pages. So when I set out to write this theodicy, I was in a class called The Problem of Evil. And I always had some questions just about a lot of things, especially like, where does Satan fit into all of this, the evil, and did he have free will? How did he fall? And it all just kind of got tied together as I was listening to or reading a book from Alvin Plantinga, and then some of the own stuff I had been thinking about involving Molinism. When I'll explain briefly what Molinism is. So I'm a Molinist, and I believe in middle. A Molinist is basically someone that believes that God possesses middle knowledge. Middle knowledge is the knowledge of all true counterfactuals. So, for example, if God would know this statement, if Val were to come on the show today and talk to Aaron, then he would become a Christian. Now, God knows if that statement is true or false, and right now it does have a true or false value, and God knows what it is. So, but also God can use this knowledge to decree any possible world that He wants to accomplish all of His, everything He wants to accomplish. So, thrust of my argument, what does God want to accomplish? Well, He wants to save everyone that can possibly be saved by anyone that, through their own free will, can accept Christ. God's actualized a world in which that will happen. So, as I was reading Plantinga in his free will defense, and he was arguing against a famous philosopher J.L. Mackie, I came across this quote, and it really struck me too. It's a brilliant quote by Mackie, and it says, "If God has made men such that in their free choices they sometimes prefer what is good and sometimes what is evil, why could he not have made men such that they always freely choose the good? If there is no logical impossibility in a man's freely choosing the good on one or several occasions, there cannot be a logical impossibility in his freely choosing the good on every occasion. There was open to him the obviously better possibility of making beings who would freely act, or act freely, but always do right. Clearly, his failure to avail himself of this possibility is inconsistent with his being both omnipotent and wholly good." So, even though Mackie was a compatibilist, Plantinga realized that this still had some weight against a libertarian like himself. Like, you could kind of just rephrase it, and using libertarian jargon, you could say, why couldn't God have made a libertarianly free world in which everyone freely chooses to do good? Well, I'm going to argue that both Mackie and Plantinga are right. Val, are you familiar with Plantinga's free will defense?
Yes, generally. Good.
Okay. So in his free will defense, he basically says, well, maybe people have this this thing called transworld depravity. And it's important to understand that, like, God doesn't make people with transworld depravity. Like, it's a category that he can describe them as belonging to, because he foresees what they're going to do. So if someone is transworld depraved, then in any world that they could be created where they have that kind of libertarian freedom, they're going to choose to do at least one evil thing. So then Plantinga goes on to say, well, maybe everyone is transworld depraved, so it wasn't in God's power to make a world where there is no evil, because everyone is transworld depraved, and hence that's why we have evil. So my thought was, when I first heard this, I was like, why is it the case that libertarian free will is such that somehow everyone's transworld depraved? Is there something about it that just like causes people to be transworld depraved? And I'm like, I don't want to accept that, because I'm an indeterminist. I don't think that anything causes our choices. Things influence us, but we ultimately have the decision to do right or wrong. So my thought was, well, what should we expect? And as a mathematician, I'm like, let's break down all the categories and the cases. So I broke it into 6 different cases. So I extended the categories of transworld depravity. Well, in existence already is transworld depravity, which we already talked about, and there's also something called transworld damnation. Transworld damnation is a category where if someone belongs to this, then in every possible world in which they're instantiated with libertarian free will, they will ultimately reject God and go to hell. So notice that one of those, the transworld depravity refers to someone's actions in a world, but the transworld damnation really refers to their salvation status, where they ultimately end up. So I created 6 classes total, 3 of which refer to actions and 3 which refer to a person's salvation state in a particular world. And so I'll break those down really quick. We've already talked about 2 of them. There's also something called transworld inconsistent. So being is transworld inconsistent if in any some possible worlds they do right all the time, and other possible worlds they do at least one evil action. And then kind of going with that is transworld salvation inconsistent, referring to their salvation status. If someone is transworld S inconsistent or salvation inconsistent, then in some worlds they will be saved, and in other worlds they won't be saved. And then the final 2 categories that go together are transworld altruistic and transworld salvation. If a being possesses this transworld salvation, then he or she is going to be saved in every single possible world in which they have libertarian free will. So by the end of their life, they will accept God. Now notice that even if someone's transworld saved, they can still do something evil during their life that just they're going to end up in every possible world. They're going to end up coming to God. And then the one that goes with that is also transworld altruistic. Now, this is an interesting class, because if a being is transworld altruistic, then in every possible world in which they're instantiated, they never do any evil in every possible world. So they always do good. Well, you could imagine if a being always does good, then they'll always be saved. So there's a necessity that if you are transworld altruistic, then you are necessarily transworld saved, but not the other way around, of course. And so I think that what happened is when God, looked into the future, and not to say that there is he knows things innately. That's kind of like what I believe. So I don't want to. Anyway, so he innately knows that there's all these beings that he could create. And when he decided to create, he could have just created the transworld altruistic. And in my paper, I argue that those are just the angels in heaven that have never done anything evil. None of the humans are transworld altruistic. So he could have just made those angels, those essences, and they would have never done anything evil. There would be no evil, and everything would be praising God. But he knew that there's all these other essences that, in certain cases, if he put them in the right world, they would serve him. So he wanted to optimize salvation and bring every possible being that could be saved into his presence. So unfortunately, because of the nature of libertarian free will, he may have had to create some of the transworld damned so he could produce the right circumstances to get everyone that could to freely choose to accept him. So he said, you know what, I'm going to make every essence that I can that can be saved. I'm going to make as few as possible of the transworld damned just to accomplish my goal. I'm going to minimize evil in the world, and we're going to create. So that's pretty much the thrust of my argument.
Sounds good.
I can't hear you.
You're on mute. You're on mute, buddy.
Yeah.
I'm off. Yeah. Would you like me to reply now, David?
Yeah, you're up,
Yes.
man.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks for that, Aaron. I want to get to a point that I just heard, and then double back to a few other things I want to say to sort of plant some flags, you might say. So I found your theodicy interesting. Like Plantinga's is a free will defense, right? It's not a theodicy, and he sort of generally describes it. I don't want to use the word weak, but I mean it sort of just establishes the possibility rather than a sort of a strong sort of theodicy where you explain why there is actually evil and how it's compatible with God. But so when I originally heard your argument, and you talked about how you sort of bumped over the idea of Mackey's saying that no, you sort of bumped over the idea of transworld depravity, which I always have as well. It's just never made sense to me. Basically, the idea that let alone one person would in every possible world choose to do evil at least once, let alone all of us being in all the created beings being in a state like that. It seems weird, and I thought that you were sort of bumping on that too, because it seems to, if we're talking about a being that is reliably going to choose to do evil in any possible world, even if it's once, there seems to be an element of determinism there to explain it. And I thought originally you were sort of hesitating about that. Like, that seems a bit odd. Why would everybody be depraved in that way? It just, like I said, feels slightly determined how to get out of that. I thought you were sort of inventing some other categories to say, hey, there's varieties where some people actually wouldn't choose evil, and so you've opened up the doors to the freedom where it's not necessary that every created being would have this. But then again, that doesn't. I guess you weren't really going there, because if I even think of your transworld altruistic beings, the same sense of determinism seems to apply there as to transworld depraved beings, if you see what I'm saying. So I guess I'm back to not sure exactly what your problem was with the transworld depraved to begin with. If you could clarify that for me.
Sure. The problem is not, for me, it's not that a particular essence could be such that he or she always chooses to do good in every world or to do bad in every world, or at least one instance of each or whatever. My issue is when all essences do that. That seems, and I guess I really, if I'm a libertarian, I shouldn't totally have this issue, because I get that it kind of still presents itself when you look at a particular individual. But the nature of libertarian free will is such that anything could happen, and it's not unusual for us to understand that with free will, a being could just choose to do good in every world or evil. I just thought it was maybe a little bit more robust to say that those other possibilities could happen, to make it seem like there wasn't some kind of an issue with libertarian freedom that would cause a being to always be transworld depraved. I'm offering these other options to say that, hey, you could have done really anything. But you should still think that even about a particular transworld depraved. They could have done otherwise in all possible worlds, but they just don't. And that's the confusing part about it. And the nature of libertarian free will is just confusing. Like, why do people, I don't know. And I mean, compatibilism is just as confusing, and I think it has just as many problems too. So.
Okay, so yeah, so actually, yeah, no, then what I was thinking is a little more on the mark, I think there. So yeah, so I'm coming from the position of compatibilism myself, and so, you know, when presented with either Plantinga's argument or your version, it's still you're still sort of assuming libertarian free will, and so part of the pushback can be just whether the libertarian version of free will is acceptable to begin with, if it makes sense, and bringing a compatibilist perspective to that possibly, or you can also just assume libertarian free will and see if the theodicy or the defense works anyway. And so and also it's since you introduce the trans world altruistic, it's interesting because it takes a little bit of wind out of my sails, because that's, for instance, not something that it seems Plantinga's argument grants. And I think I sort of had a bit of an argument against Plantinga's argument as far as that goes. But I still don't see that you have solved the general problem. And to step back, I think I need to sort of, like I said, plant some flags in the ground from which to start here. So obviously we're talking about morality to begin with, and if we're going to evaluate whether some defense means that suffering and evil is compatible with a good God, then we generally have to know what we're talking about what a good person would do or not. And so I would start, like most atheists, with from a standpoint of sort of consistency with how we evaluate persons that we know, other human beings, other agents that we know. And so, you know, we'd be talking about things like a person who is loving or just or benevolent or kind or compassionate, and looking to see whether those whether somebody's actions warrant those descriptions. And after all, Christians recognize this problem too. I mean, that's why theodicies arise. You're trying to make the goodness of God, if God is good, consistent at least with our moral intuitions and how we appraise the character of other people, good or bad. So, for instance, C.S. Lewis put it, if God's moral judgment differs from ours, so that our black may be as white, we can mean nothing by calling him good. For to say God is good, while asserting that his goodness is wholly other than ours, is really only to say God is we know not what. And an utterly unknown quality in God cannot give us moral grounds for loving or obeying him. If he is not, in our sense, good, we shall obey, if at all, only through fear, and should be equally ready to obey an omnipotent fiend. So I'm going to keep looking at whether the instances of suffering, etc., that you want to say are compatible with thinking of God as good make sense in a consistent way with how we usually use those terms and how we evaluate people's actions. And so another sort of flag to, I mean, generally, you know, benevolence is one way that we judge whether somebody's good or bad. So, if you're writing a movie script and you've got one character who just callously disregards or sacrifices the well-being of innocent people to achieve his aims, and you have another character who acts to safeguard the well-being of innocent people, even at the risk to his own well-being, then you've got your bad guy and your good guy. And as I've said, nobody walks out of Star Wars wondering if Darth Vader was the villain or Luke Skywalker was the hero. We've got substantial agreement on what good people versus bad people looks like. And also, we evaluate the goodness or badness of people generally on the evidence for their character, just as we evaluate other empirical claims. So if our neighbor Joe seems generally cheery and helps us boost our dead car battery, and he volunteers at the local soup kitchen, that's evidence we can have for the conclusion that Joe is a good person. But, if the next day authorities are digging up bodies of tortured women and children in Joe's backyard and they find torture in his basement with DNA linking Joe to the crimes, well, then on the evidence, we reevaluate the proposition that Joe's a good person. We actually say overall, Joe's an evil person, a bad person. And we don't reason backwards by saying, well, but Joe says he's good and he did some good things, so we've established that Joe's good. Therefore, Joe is good, and we have to presume that all the torturing of the women and children is somehow compatible with that and good and morally justified. Nobody reasons backwards like that for good reason. It's sort of special pleading to start reasoning like that about, it seems to me, any being. And that's one of my main beefs when I generally listen to Christian defenses for most things, is I find most of it devolved to some form of special pleading or the like. And so we also evaluate that somebody wouldn't cause gratuitous suffering. So one other thing I just want to plant a flag. I think this is important. Actually, ends up bearing on some of your argument too. So we also evaluate the goodness of people not only from the standpoint of their actions, but we evaluate their goals and desires. So an instance of evil or suffering is not excused simply because it may be necessary in the sense of being necessary to achieve a person's goal, because after all, bad people have bad goals that involve gratuitous suffering. So just as a weird example, perhaps, imagine Joe Biden said he's going to give vaccines to India while the citizens of India are undergoing severe suffering from the COVID pandemic. But, says Joe Biden, he will only distribute the vaccines to those Indian people who show themselves to be the most willing to cause pain and death to others. So Joe sets up essentially a sort of Star Trek, a mock time contest pitting family against family in battles to the death. The winners get the vaccine. Nobody would say that the suffering and the evil born of that type of contest was necessary simply because it happens to be necessary to achieve Biden's desire toward only the most savage persons with vaccines. That's not the goal a good person would have in the first place. For the same reason, I feel the Christian can't, in some instances, excuse instances of evil and suffering because God made them necessary components for meeting a desire or goal. That indicates the goals of an evil being, not a good being. So we have to evaluate if a being with the power of a God to do otherwise would have goals that involve evil and suffering, especially if it seems gratuitous in light of his omnipotence. And so the last flag I think I'll plant on the ground for a moment is sort of gratuitous suffering. So essential issue is the concept of gratuitous suffering, which is something we recognize to be bad, something a good person wouldn't produce or cause if it's within their power to do otherwise. So for instance, there was this harrowing, heartbreaking story in the news a few years ago of a young girl. I think she was like 5 years old or something, and she had this terrible illness. I can't remember what it was, but it necessitated that she was intubated painfully virtually every day of her life. She had to go through this process to continually save her. So she was just in continual agony, and it was to the point where even at, it was 5 years old, I think, she was begging to die. Now, what if the doctors who were trying to save her with that process, what if the doctor had a pill? It was just it's a tasty little sugar pill with an ingredient that would stop this girl's suffering and produce the results they wanted in saving her that the intubation was going to do. But it wouldn't involve all the suffering of the intubation. we would all agree that the doctor who didn't tell anybody about that and went with instead the intubation that caused all the suffering, that would be wrong. He'd be a bad person. He's causing gratuitous suffering because he had the power to do otherwise. We can't let God get away with suffering and evil that's gratuitous. And so then once we do that, we sort of get into the issue of free will. And here, I guess, we'll come down to the sort of a clash between the compatibilism and libertarian free will, where in compatibilism, it's sort of like free will is the ability of agents to make choices unimpeded, generally. And it's the view that, we have a clash of intuitions that bring out the free will problem to begin with. One is the intuition of causal determinism, that everything has a cause, and therefore our actions would be result from a series of causes, and therefore our actions are caused, and then maybe we didn't cause them. On the other hand, we've got the intuition from everyday experience that we actually do have real choices. I could ride my bike or the car to work, and if I choose to drive my car, I could have ridden my bike instead. It seems very intuition driven, so that if your intuition goes more strongly with the idea that causal determinism is something that you can't disregard, you're going to become a free will skeptic and say, look, okay, free will must be an illusion then, because if our actions are simply determined beforehand, then they're not really free, so we don't have free will. On the other hand, if your intuition is so strong that you just can't deny that you actually do seem to be making real choices day in and day out, you're going to generally adhere to free will of some sort, and in your case, libertarian free will. Whereas the compatibilist views that our free choices would be actually compatible with causal determinism, with everything being determined. So that, and part of the physically determined universe, if in fact the universe is determined. So if you, there's the idea of Laplace's demon who knows, who has such a wide scope of knowledge that he knows the status of every and placement of every molecule and atom in the universe, and from that he can predict the next state of the universe, and that would include all of our choices. So that this Laplace's demon could predict all of our choices, and therefore it would seem that if this demon can predict what I'm going to do, then I'm only going to do that one thing, and that it seems therefore to deny alternatives and therefore deny free will. But compatibilism says that no, we actually generally want our choices to be determined, and I can get into that a bit more, but I won't at the moment. So, whereas a libertarian free will, William Lane Craig would put it. Let's see. He'd say to be free is to be free of causal determinants outside of oneself. Your choice is up to you. It's not determined by causal factors outside yourself. So in this type of libertarian free will, the type generally Christians believe in, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you believe in, it's you might say it's a supernatural. We have this ability. Our choices are outside the causal chain of causation, at least the chain of physical causation. But I still don't think, and the other thing is, I still don't think that gets out of the problem, even if you grant libertarian free will. Sorry,
Rich. That was that we got a lot of information there.
Sorry, sorry.
Why don't we let Aaron start responding to some of it?
I'm sorry, I went on too long. Sorry about that.
I usually, but that was a good opening. I mean, I think you addressed a lot of stuff, and for Skype calls, we just try to, we don't want it like too long.
Yeah,
that's good stuff. That's good stuff. I think Aaron's got a lot to respond to. So yeah, won't you go give a crack at it, Aaron?
Okay, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I hear a lot there, and a lot of it seems like it's a psychologically motivated objection. I'm not hearing a whole lot of philosophical objections, I guess, other than the I believe in compatibilism and you're a libertarian. On that note, I do believe that things cause us to make a decision. So, like if I'm standing on a train track and a train's coming at me, that causes me to make a decision. Like I either can stand there and get hit by it, or I can move. But either way, I'm forced to do one of those two things. Maybe there's a third option, like I don't know. But either you move out of the way or you stand there. But what I'm saying as a libertarian is that if I choose to move after the fact, when you look back on the situation, it's true that I could have just stayed there. So I have open options, at least two or more. So if you know the principle of alternative possibilities, that is the most important thing to my philosophy regarding freedom of will, that we have open options and it's not just one fixed option. So I think where a lot of the debate between libertarians and compatibilists is one's trying to make the other one look like, compatibilists are trying to make the indeterminists look like, oh, you believe in this like some kind of vacuum thing where like everything's uncaused and some supernatural thing. I don't think that that's it. I mean, what we choose, whether to move out of the way or stay there, I think that there is an autonomy to the person that is a God-given gift. But I don't think it's a supernatural thing to say like it's a miracle that I like chose to move out of the way of the train. No, it's a choice that I made with my reason and intuition and but nothing internally caused me to move out of the way of the train. But what did so if that makes sense. But there are things like with stimuli. I don't deny that if someone throws a ball at you, you duck. Like really, really fast. Like with the train coming, you have time to think about it. But when someone throws a ball at your face, the natural reaction is to like, squint or whatever, or cover yourself. And I think that might be in a way determined by like just an automatic response that we do have programmed in us. So I'm not denying that there are forms of compatibilism in creation. But when it comes down to big decisions where you have time to think about what you're doing, especially in regards to moral decisions, you do have a freedom there between different possibilities. But I'm not hearing any philosophical objections really to my argument. And I feel like if we go down this route, we're going to end up right back in the moral argument. And I have my issues with how does an atheist, come up with a structure for morality if you and a guy named John has completely different worldviews and he thinks it's okay to kill babies. How do you determine like who's right and wrong? What if all of society is saying like it's okay to kill babies? I mean, that could happen. You never know. I mean, there were societies that did pretty wicked things to people. So I just don't know how you can really have a base. As far as like, what do you think is Val? What do you think is like the greatest display of love that one person could show another? I'm just curious to see what you would say about that.
Okay. Not sure I've thought about that, but to double back for a split second, this is one of the flags I was planting to begin with, is that I don't have to have come with a moral theory of my own to necessarily evaluate whether the Christian is being consistent in calling God good.
Well, if you're going to say that I'm being inconsistent, you're going to need an alternative theory that you can defend.
No, not insofar as, like I said, that you share generally the way we evaluate other persons as good or bad. So if you're going to say somebody is good, if you're going to say somebody's bad for causing gratuitous suffering, then you should be consistent with that.
Okay, let's go with that, because I did hear that come up a lot. On my theodicy, I don't think gratuitous evil exists. Right. There's a scripture in the Bible that says God works all things for the good of those who love him. So I think that literally everything that happens has an intention towards saving someone, and that's the ultimate goal. Now, does that sound a little bit like consequentialism? Yes, it does, and I've failed to see anyone ever present anything that doesn't sound somewhat consequentialist. I am a non-consequentialist. I think that there is a true, pure right and wrong, and I think it's established in God's nature. And I mean, you don't accept that premise, but I am definitely a non-consequentialist, and I do not think that there is any gratuitous evil in the world. And I think it would be on you to show that I can't hold that view with my theodicy.
That's what I was getting to when I was saying earlier about how we have to look at we have to look at the goals and desires of somebody as well, whether somebody would desire to bring in to being a situation that has suffering, and therefore whether it's gratuitous or not. So I will get to that. Also, I'm sorry, you asked me about what would be the greatest show of love?
Yeah, that a person could do for another, yeah.
I guess the first one that comes to me perhaps is sacrifice. I hope that plays into your worldview.
Yeah, Jesus did that for you on the cross. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I buy that. I just don't think it was necessary. But so get I guess a little bit more philosophical here. I would I'll just sort of present a basic idea that seems to me to sort of argue against Plantinga's defense, but also it seems to me plays against yours as well if we go through it, I think. So the idea that there's the idea that Christians often say that to have, and Plantinga seems to say that to have the most valuable form of free will will contain the ability to choose to do evil. That would be morally relevant free will, or sufficiently free will. And that's, sorry?
Sure. In my paper, that's not exactly what I define, and I kind of disagree with that. The ability to do evil would be the most valuable form of freedom. Specifically, I said, if I can find it, hold on. It's where the DR stuff is, the divine rule. Okay. Okay, here we go. I'm getting close to it. Where is it? I don't know if it's in this part or not. But basically I said that that God wants us to have just the ability to not do exactly what he wants us to do, to rebel. So that like we're not like slaves. We're not mental slaves. Like he's like, do this, and we're like doing it now. Like we're not robots. So we have the ability to disobey God, and that that is evil and that's sin. But disobeying God is the most valuable form of freedom, to be able to do that. And imagine like if you have the ability to disobey God and you choose not to, like how great that is. That's so great to be able to do that. It's valuable to be able to do that.
But suffering even in the suffering can't be gratuitous still, even within your defense, right? There can't be any gratuitous suffering. So people doing evil things to each other, if that's gratuitous and didn't have to be, that would still be a problem for your
defense. But in my paper, I actually argue that in addition, so like there are other essences that God could have made that were transworld damned, that could have been here. He could have still probably saved everyone that he could save, and then they would go to hell. So I argue that he not only minimizes that, but he minimizes all of the evil done from anyone in the world that he's created, so that it's all accomplishing the act of saving anyone that can be saved. Like there's not one single thing that one of us can do that isn't in a way, I don't want to use the word predetermined, but it's like been predestined to be a part of his plan to come to, or not, I don't want to say cause, you know, but to lead to someone freely choosing to serve God. And every like, no matter how minuscule it is, like somehow like Bambi burning in the forest, like has a plan tied in to, you know, what God is doing to save everyone. Like somehow that ties in, and I can't explain it. But I guarantee
Some
that you
butterfly
can't.
effect.
Yeah, I can guarantee that you can't explain how it's impossible.
Well, yeah, that's one of my problems with the logical problems of evil. I don't find them generally very interesting because I think evidential problems are generally how we generally think and appraise things. And I don't think God stands up to any sort of evidential challenges. So let me just go to this for a moment. So the idea that God can do anything logically possible, right?
Yes, logically possible. Yes.
Yeah. So God could create any logically possible being, and a being with free will who only chooses good is a logically possible being. So God could create a being.
Hold on. I want to. Well, yeah, it's. How do I want to word this?
I can establish premise too.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
Yeah. So God. So anyways, yes. So premise 2 would be a being with free will who only chooses good is a logically possible being. The conclusion is God can create a being with free will who only chooses good. So what establishes premise 2? Well, it seems to me God himself establishes premise 2, because we're always told from Christians that God acts in accordance with his nature, which is always good, and that God is essentially good in every logically possible world, and yet God is free. So God establishes the feasibility of a being like that who is relevantly free and who only ever chooses the good. So I don't see how that can be denied.
Well, you got to be really careful, because what you're doing is you're actually kind of sneaking in determinism, I believe. Notice that I said that I do believe that there are essences out there that God could have created that would have always done good, and he could have just created all of those essences.
Yes.
Let's say it's 13.5 billion essences, and we would all be saved, and none of us would have done evil, and it wouldn't include me, because I think I'm one of the trans world depraved. But he could have made that creation and there would be no sin in the world. But it isn't necessarily possible that God could create every possible being that's free such that they all choose to do the good. Because if there is a genuine choice, then God can't like deny that choice. And if one of those beings chooses to disobey God, he can't force them to do it. That doesn't work.
I don't see how I missed it, but I don't see how that gets over how I just established premise 2. And yes, I am talking about.
Sure.
I'm mentioning a form of determinism. I'm challenging the sort of libertarian view that you have, because it seems like a form of determinism is actually snuck into the reason for why we have to accept the idea that God would never choose evil. So, like, why can we know that God would never come down in this world or any possible world and just start torturing children because he likes it? There has to be something that makes that predictable. So Christians are always referring to God's nature to establish why he wouldn't do that. God he's beholden to his all good nature, and he has free will, but then it must be the case that free will is compatible with a determinate nature. I mean, his nature must be, it seems to me, determining what he can and can't do. Otherwise, how in the world can we possibly say or predict that God would never do X?
Well, first of all, we do have faith in that, but I see the thrust of your argument is that you're saying that you're saying that God can't do evil. And I think I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that he is determined to do good. All that is required on a libertarian freedom view is that you have alternative possibilities. So I guess you could say that God could have made beings that only could choose good because that was the only thing in existence. But I do argue in my paper that there's some reason for that, that God can't do that, because I think it's evil to upfront create beings that can only do good, because they never had the option to do anything otherwise. So that's where it does get tricky, and I will agree with you. But I think there's something about it where God has to establish that a being wants to do good just because they do, and that has to happen.
Just because they do doesn't sound like an explanation.
What do you mean?
It doesn't. I mean, I think, yeah, I am introducing the idea of a sort of a determinism to a degree and compatibilism, but that's kind of the point. That it seems that it still seems to me that if you have to explain why God predictably won't or can't choose to do evil, and why his nature is to choose good in every possible world. And like I said, I mean,
sure.
Christians constantly talk about, I'll just finish this. Like, Christians constantly talk about God's nature because the nature, it really makes sense to ascribe a nature to a person if the nature would explain the person's actions. But if free will is contra-causal, then no standing nature can explain or predict an agent's actions, precisely because nothing causes the decision which leads to the action. So, I mean, like, you've got to. I'm just looking for an explanation for why God would always choose good in every possible world, and it seems to me that the usual appeal is to God's nature, and if that doesn't explain it, if God's nature is not somehow determinate of what we can expect him to do, I have no idea how you're telling me we would know what God would do or not.
Well, again, I'm saying for certain that because God's nature is such that he is all good.
Nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
That does not mean that he is determined. That you're conflating the understanding of libertarian freedom. All we say is
I'm challenging it.
All we say is that we need to have alternative possibilities. God could have created, or he could have decided not to create. That's alternative possibilities. So God could do something good, or he could do something else that's good. So there are other options.
Yes, but once again, saying that there are other options doesn't explain why somebody chooses any particular option. So, I mean, I feel like there's the same thing that happens when I talk to Christians about, just using Adam and Eve as an example. Why?
Well, let me ask you this real
Sure.
quick. So you think that everything is determined, right?
Yes.
That's your stance. So are even our thoughts determined?
Yes.
Okay, so then your whole defense for this day against my theodicy is determined. You have been determined to think the way that you do.
I've been determined to think, in a sense, yes.
Okay, so like, how can you, like, you're determined to believe that my theodicy is false and that God doesn't exist? On your view.
In a sense, yes.
Okay, how can you trust that?
First of all, I should say this is just like the moral argument. I don't actually have to answer that necessarily. I'm actually pointing out
well, I can answer it for you. You can't trust it. Because if everything is determined in your own mind, you can't trust anything that you think.
No, that's a non sequitur. But I'll get to that for a second.
No, but if you do trust it, it's just because you're determined to trust it. But that has nothing to do with whether it's true or false.
No, as I said, I believe that's a non sequitur. We'll get to that moment. But the point is you're still not explaining why we can expect why somebody does something and not something else. And so it gives me no basis to.
Well, I told you because they choose to do it.
But you don't.
And that's the nature of libertarian free will.
If I ask you, why did you go to University X? Why did you choose to go to University X over University Y? And you say, well, because I had a choice. Have you answered my
Well,
question? No, it presumes you got a choice.
Well, I had a choice between a lot of different universities, and
why did you make a choice?
I reasoned and made a decision, and that decision was an autonomous uh, thing that I have that is a God-given ability to choose things. Like, so
yeah, but you would give me reasons for why you made a choice, right?
But if I give you, see, you're trying to force me into determinism, because if I have to give you a reason for my choice, then I'm having to show you that it's caused by something.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're actually like forcing me to like conform to determinism. But
sort of, yeah.
You can't do that. That's not how an argument works. You have to show why indeterminism is incorrect. And if you want to do that, good luck, because no one has done that ever. And no one's on the other side. No one's ever shown that compatibilism is false either. You can't. I think it's impossible.
No, I'm not arguing that you have to conclude that it's false, or that I have to show that it's false. I'm looking at the consequences, the implications of, for instance, the libertarian stance, and also when people tell me that God would only ever choose good, and how we can how that can be predicted. I have no reason to accept it, except you use the word faith earlier.
If you say predicted, we can trust and we can have faith that God is going to do the right thing, because we've been revealed Scripture and whatnot. And I get that you're going to say that's a circular argument in some ways, and maybe it is in some ways, and we can't avoid that. But it's almost like you're trying to go above and beyond God and to give a reason for God's actions. And I'm going to tell you that I don't think that that's possible, because we can't understand the mind of God. And that's not a cop-out. I'm just saying, like, most of us can't understand the mind of Einstein. And then Einstein has a greater and whatnot. And we're never going to know everything. So all you can do is, if you can show an inconsistency and indeterminism, then I would love to hear that. But it has to be something that you can genuinely show that I'm being inconsistent by holding incompatibilism.
Well, I'm also challenging the general coherence of the libertarian view here, but showing that it seems like you actually do, in the case of God, have to explain things with something determining what God does, in this case being his nature. Otherwise it just doesn't seem to make any sense. And you seem to be saying, well, we just kind of accept it as a given that God can do this, and it doesn't seem like an answer at all to me.
Well, I'm also saying that, like, God only doing good and having a nature that's wholly good does not mean therefore determinism. That's not true at all. God having open options. If you could show that God doesn't have open options, like God had to create this world, God had to send Christ at a particular time in history, a certain way, like everything had to be done a certain way, then God himself is determined. But you have to show that.
No, I don't think I do, actually.
because if you don't, then I can just say that God had open options, and he chose this to make this world.
No, so, but
that's all libertarian needs, is to have open options.
Yes, but I'm saying that people can have open options, but something explains why one person chooses something over the other. I still think that if God could be determined to choose something by his nature, and God can still have essentially open options in the sense that he had the power to do otherwise, but chose to do good. But let me. I guess I think we're. I don't. Think
I will say this.
Past this, so yeah.
I can't explain to you, like, when I choose to get out of the way of a train rather than letting it hit me, I can't explain to you how that decision comes about. And I genuinely believe that it comes as say from me, within me, and that it's a God-given power to choose. I don't think that anything causes it other than the choice itself. And I can't explain to you how how that choice arises, because first of all, if I do, I'm accepting determinism. So
Yeah.
Um,
and I'm sort of challenging that.
but it's not inconsistent for me to believe that we just choose things and the cause of our decision is our choice.
It doesn't
Itself.
sound coherent though. Yeah, it's the whole problem, right? Which is where do you place in any causal chain the exception from causation without it essentially causing randomness? I don't see where you can insert it anywhere where the next thing that follows, if not determined, if it wasn't determined from your previous self a moment ago, or
So-
from, sorry.
How do you feel about the cosmological argument? Because if you think everything has a cause, then do you believe in an infinite series digressing, or do you think that there was a first cause of like the first being, or were there just infinite beings going back?
I think, I think if I'm thinking of, for instance, Craig's version of the cosmological argument, I think it was, I'm not a cosmologist, but I think it was answered pretty well by Sean Carroll in his debate, where he was saying that in modern, using sort of, Craig was appealing to old modern physics, metaphysics, and modern cosmology doesn't require necessarily, doesn't, you can explain things as far as enclosed models. So I'm not going to give the defense for that now because I'm not Sean Carroll, and I've got other problems with the leap in the cosmological argument to.
But do you believe that there are an infinite series of beings trending backwards, or do you think that there is a first being?
I don't know.
Because if you do think that there is a first being, then you should have no issue with there being a first thought for Aaron to say, let's get out of the way of the train. And it can arise on its own merit without any causes. So if you disagree with that, then you should accept an infinite string of beings going backwards. And in anything, you should think that everything trends back to infinity. And I would love you to show how you can have an infinity trending backwards.
Yeah, so I don't have a firm stance on that because I've seen the arguments back and forth that an actual infinity is possible, and others that it's possible, and I don't have a firm stance on that because I don't think I know.
Well, do you think it might be the case that since you don't really totally understand that, and I don't either, to be honest, that it could be the case that a thought arises as say from the being as a first cause, and then creates the action? Is it possible?
I suppose I can grant that possibility, and then it gets into the responsibility of that agent, if that's the case.
So then join me on the libertarian side. You could be free.
Guys,
you could be free.
There's one thing that I was thinking throughout this whole time, and I was like, you know what? The biggest thing that I don't understand is Einstein's hair. You know?
There you go, yeah.
I just thought it was funny when you said that about Einstein. I was just like, that just popped in my head of his hair, man.
Right. Yeah.
For his, and it was wild. He didn't keep his hair. Everybody knew it. I just watched a documentary on his life, so it's pretty neat. But yeah, guys, I mean, this has been great so far. We're about to wrap it up. It's about an hour in, and I think we've got a lot to think about. On both sides.
I say one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Val, like you said, the greatest thing that could ever happen for a being to show to another being would be a sacrifice. And in Scripture it says that no greater deed than he who lays down his life for a friend. Jesus has done that on the cross for you. And I am asking you at some point in your life if you think more about that, to accept Christ, and he will save you and he loves you. So I just want to leave you with that.
Sure, that's going to be hard because I view it as, if anything, evil. That essentially it seems to be sacrificing gratuitous suffering. God could have forgiven people without sacrificing his son in a bloody ceremony, etc.
There's a great argument for the necessity of the not necessarily crucifixion. They have that too, but for the atonement in itself. And of course, you have the different atonement theories. Could God have done it like not on a cross and everything? But God does everything for a reason, and the cross was important. But I also agree with you that I disagree with you. I think it was a necessity for him to send his son, because only death could pay for life, and it had to be a divine being that could withstand the wrath of God. And but I don't necessarily think that the necessity of the way it happened. Of course, he could have made a different world and it could have been done different, but I do believe that he did everything in a particular way so that he could save as many souls as possible. And yep.
Sorry, don't want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So it doesn't seem at all necessary for me, and it seems I won't get into it, but it just seems special pleading. We sort of wouldn't accept all these. We wouldn't accept this reasoning for any other person, and it seems like the rules flip 180 every time we're talking about God, and I never see the continuity between how we appraise good and evil among ourselves, and then suddenly it's flip. Oh, it's okay when God demands a sacrifice in order to forgive people. But if I can just do one really quick thing, because probably my fault, but we could have moved on from the idea that God could create beings who always choose good, which you seem to acknowledge with the transworld altruistic people. And that way, I would have suggested that it seems gratuitous that God would have therefore also gone on to create beings who also do evil, even if they're ultimately saved, because he didn't need to create beings who also did evil and created suffering. He could have kept creating beings who only ever choose good. And so it seems gratuitous to do otherwise. And that sort of ties into, it doesn't seem like a good person would have the goal of if having the choice between creating a being or beings that would only choose good and be saved without gratuitous suffering, but decides nonetheless to choose other beings who don't just choose good and create suffering.
Sure.
To save them.
Well, gratuitous means without a purpose, without a meaning, just evil just because. And I definitely don't claim that at all. I claim the opposite.
I know that.
He creates these transworld inconsistent beings and transworld depraved beings so he can save them. Now it comes at the cost of creating some beings that are transworld damned. And that might be the only way that God can accomplish it, given the nature of libertarian free will. Like, God has to allow us to do certain things. And, I think maybe it would have been evil and sinful for him to create determined beings.
That's exactly why I did that. I'm sorry, too long preamble, bringing up things like the Biden example, because that was to address that kind of thing. Because what you've just told me essentially is that it was necessary for God to create the beings who would also create some evil, because God had the desire to save those type of beings as well. But that doesn't actually excuse it any more than the idea that I'm saying, that than the idea that Biden had to have beings have people fight it out for vaccines, because otherwise he wouldn't have achieved his goal to also give it to people who kill each other for the vaccines. I don't see that seems to have excused anything. It's just like,
I don't agree with that, but I offer another argument in my paper that I say that it might have been, I think I say this somewhere, that it might have been necessary for God to create the transworld inconsistent and depraved, the ones that he knew would choose him in a particular set of circumstances, and it would be evil for him to just create the altruistic beings that would serve him. So in that, that sounds maybe more like a defense than a theodicy, but it is tied into my theodicy, and I I think it's reasonable for us to take that argument on its merit that he may have had to create every being that could be in his presence, because not creating the abundance of essences that would be in his presence and experience his love and joy, the maximum amount of love that he could give, that would be evil. So,
and that's sounding, and you saying you don't want to be a consequentialist, but it's, it keeps hinting at consequentialism. And which brings in a similar consequentialist type of objection, which is, it sounds like the more people God can create to save, the better. So what's the stopping point? Why didn't he create more? Why don't we see this rather empty looking universe just filled with more people?
Sure. In my paper, I argue that there are two possibilities. One, there are a finite number of essences based on possibilities. And I make an argument it's decent. I mean, it's not amazing. But I also say that there may have been an infinite number of beings saved. Well, all you have to do, transworld altruistic beings, the angels in heaven, there might be an actual infinite number of angels that were saved. And he might have even done the same thing with the TSI. The only thing you'd have to limit would be the number of TSIs that he could instantiate in this world. Yeah, that's where you get a little bit of a hang up, but you can still have an actual infinite.
All right, guys. So with that, I'm going to allow you to have your closing thoughts real quick. I mean, just take a couple minutes. I really enjoyed having both of you guys on here, just fleshing this out. It's good to have these type of conversations and not doing kind of like the whole formal debate style, And again, also while you're giving these quick closings, you can plug any channel you want, or tell people where they can find you or find your work and stuff like that. So I would let Rich go first there.
Oh, okay. Geez, I don't necessarily have a closing statement. I guess no, I would just say that I'm still stuck on the problem I sort of felt I raised, that God could have created beings who always choose good, and that it just seems gratuitous to therefore also choose beings who would cause evil as well. It just seems gratuitous to me, and that would be within his power. And the idea of like it would be evil not to create people, other people who he could save, who also would do evil. It still doesn't seem like there's a cap on that. It doesn't, like, it also would seem to suggest maybe that we're evil for not having more children, or that kind of things like that. It doesn't seem like the usual way we sort of evaluate things, I guess. But I'll just wrap it up with that.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say again that it seems like on your worldview that everything that you think, everything that you, every act that you produce is determined. So it seems to me like you can't really trust anything that you think or do. And if you do, you're only trusting it because you're determined to trust that thing. I'm here to tell you that you're not determined. You're very free, and God wants to set you free even more. He died about 2,000 years ago on a cross, and he gave his only son for your life, and you have meaning and a purpose. Otherwise, none of this has a purpose, and we're all determined to just look like idiots all day long. So,
Idiots.
But I mean, I don't know anything. I know a little bit of stuff.
It would have been fun to go back and forth. Sorry, it would have been fun to go back and forth a bit on that, because, like I said, I believe it's a non sequitur, but that'll go too far.
But I'm gonna end it with God loves you, and please join us in the Christian faith.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the sentiments. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
So with that, we are closing down here, guys. Travis, do you got anything of note? Well, I mean, Aaron, you want to give a website or whatever for this argument, and are you just on Facebook?
Sure.
Or?
I'm on Facebook. I do have an apologetics group that I'm kind of forming. I just have the name in the email. It's called Aim High Apologetics. I haven't done anything with it yet. I'm still trying to figure out my path, I guess. I just did 2 degrees in theology and, before one in mathematics. And I'm still trying to figure out who I am in God and what I'm supposed to do on this earth. And,
Yeah. Would
so
you like to form an alliance?
Don't trust. Yeah, I would. Don't trust anything that I say without reading scripture. If it sounds ridiculous, it probably is. I don't say that this theodicy is the absolute truth. I just defend it because I think it is the best thing that I've ever come up with. That I've ever, and compared to other things, to me, it makes the most sense. And I'm all about defending the truth. I can't stand these people that just want to be creative and they sacrifice truth on the altar of creativity. That's not at all what I'm trying to do. Just being really creative with these categories. I genuinely just want to know what the truth is. So.
Right on. And Rich, we can find you on Skeptics and Seekers board, right?
Yeah, I'm on there occasionally. Yes, I'm on occasion. I think I'm going to be doing a podcast with them coming up where we're going to discuss free will. So I'll be defending compatibilism, that kind of thing. So flesh out.
That's you versus Dale, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And I think David Russell will probably get on my hide as well, because I think he's something of a free will skeptic. I think. But may I just
Johnson? Yeah.
David Johnson, yes.
Yeah.
But I just want to say that appreciation for you guys and for this show. I just really, I've really enjoyed listening to it, and I love the attitude that you all bring. I guess overall, sort of an attitude of kindness and humility, and I think Aaron displayed that so well too. It's just a very nice atmosphere to listen to and also to have joined for today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being here. Like I said, we're honored that you're here.
Absolutely.
We need more people to push back on us, and we need more people to join the family, so to speak. And thanks for turning your video on. I didn't expect you to have the video on, man. But hey, don't be scared.
Good with me.
It's good.
It's all good.
You look
Rich,
fine, my man.
Rich,
All
I wrote
right.
a paper.
Well, with that, again, everybody, welcome Travis as part of the team now. He is going to be here with us, helping us out, standing in for us when we're gone. And I think he's got something to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Molinist myself, so I mean, I'll keep my opinion on the discussion. I want to be neutral, but yeah, this is a super important conversation because we're talking about free will, determinism, compatibilism, the problem of evil, these theodicies. So I think whatever side you're on, this is a really interesting conversation that we need to have with each other. And I couldn't be more impressed with this discussion.
All right. Well, everybody, that's us. We're signing off. Have a good day.